Lovely to see you all here today. I chose this name for my talk because around the time of turning 20, I was going through an existential crisis and plagued by the great questions of life. Then, in the autumn of 1979, I first met Douglas Baker, a few months after my 21st birthday. My life would never be the same again. Baker's writings resonated with me. They felt strangely familiar and provided me with compelling answers to the great questions. As I read more and threw myself into the life of the group, into Baker's work to spread the teachings in the language of the day, I was flooded with meaning and purpose. My dream life reciprocated, becoming vivid and meaningful. In this talk, I will be sharing some of the material that has helped me to find answers, and I hope that you may find some value from it. I've chosen this slide background as a tribute to the Greco-Roman foundations of our Western civilization, a fact that Baker would frequently remind us of. We've just heard Jeff's introduction to the 7 postulates of the ancient wisdom. These are the foundations of my talk today, and I will refer to some of them in the slides. I live on the southwest corner of the Norfolk Broads in England. At one popular lake called Whitlingham Great Broad, about a mile from the centre of Norwich, stands this totem. It has an inscription that reads, "We have endured all of time to be here together today." From an esoteric perspective, and reflected in many spiritual and religious texts through the ages, this statement encapsulates a fundamental truth. It is an accepted fact that most of the elements from which our earth and all living creatures are made, including our own bodies, were forged in the heart of stars and blasted out into the universe in massive supernova explosions. Like many of my contemporaries, I was inspired by Carl Sagan's 1980 TV series Cosmos that was first broadcast in the UK in 1981. Sagan was a brilliant communicator and captured this eternal truth about the nature of our physical bodies when he said, "The cosmos is within us. We are made of star stuff." He also said, "We are a way for the universe to know itself." To know requires a conscious knower, and in this simple statement, whether intentionally or not, Sagan has captured another principle of the ancient wisdom. This is that life and consciousness are implicit within the universe. Consciousness is said to sleep within the mineral kingdom, has awakened within the plant kingdom, has become mobile in the animal kingdom, and in the human kingdom, consciousness has become a self-aware, resulting in our asking why. Most people at some point in their lives ask questions such as, who am I? Where do I come from? Why am I here? Why is there so much suffering in the world? Where do I go from here? These questions often first come up in childhood, but usually answered by parents in glib or dismissive ways, especially in response to the youngest children, referring to fairy tales, "A stork brought you to us," or providing partial answers referring only to the physical form. When a mummy and daddy share a bed, babies are made. Some may never consider these questions deeply, finding contentment only in what the material world offers. Others come to them following a bereavement or catastrophe that may be a personal trauma or a collective one. Douglas Baker was plagued by these questions from an early age, dealing with parental death before adulthood and the death of many friends and colleagues in World War II. He also had profound subjective experiences that contributed to him subsequently dedicating his life to finding the answers. Baker was a lover of classic literature and very well read. He kept a diary through his life. In his book, The Spiritual Diary, he lists 39 books he read during a year of active service in World War II. This avid reading continued in the years that followed. Consequently, his writings are filled with references to poetry and extracts from published literature that brings a vibrancy to his work and a richness of meaning. One passage from poetry he often referenced was the first part of the 5th stanza in Wordsworth's ode, Intimations of Immortality from Recollections of Early Childhood. Our birth is but a sleep and a forgetting, that soul that rises with us Our life star hath had elsewhere its setting, and cometh from afar, not in entire forgetfulness, and not in utter nakedness, but trailing clouds of glory do we come. This theme of a soul with an independent existence is an integral part of the ancient wisdom and the esoteric sciences. In the first of the three great truths given out by the Victorian occultist and author Mabel Collins in the Idyll of the White Lotus, first published in 1984, she said, "There are three truths which are absolute and which cannot be lost but yet remain silent for lack of speech. These are, the soul of man is immortal, and its future is the future of a thing whose growth and splendour has no limit. The principle which gives life dwells in us and without us, is undying and eternally beneficent, is not heard or seen or smelt, but is perceived by the man who desires perception. And each man is his own absolute lawgiver, the dispenser of glory or gloom to himself, the decreer of his life, his reward, his punishment." There are some obvious correlations between these truths and the postulates of ancient wisdom, most notably Postulate 1. All things organic and inorganic are filled with life, from the tiniest atom to the greatest galaxy, and Postulate 7 that states, birth and rebirth are endless until karma is satisfied. But before we explore these truths, I want to first look at what is real. Postulate 6 tells us that the material world is an illusion. Maya is a powerful force of illusion that conceals ultimate reality and that makes the phenomenal world appear real and permanent. We live in very interesting times with the discoveries quantum physicists have made about the quantum realm. The further they peer into the nature of reality, the more they are finding irrefutable evidence to support this postulate. Most of what makes up the universe is unknown. All the galaxies, stars, planets, and exotic objects in the universe represent only 5% of what should be there. 27% is considered to be dark matter. We can see its effect through what is called gravitational lensing, but science as yet does not know what it is. But most of the unknown universe is dark energy. Until the discoveries of quantum mechanics, since the beginning of the 20th century, atoms used to be considered the fundamental building blocks of the material world. But we now know atoms are made up of quantum particles that have no internal structure and no physical size. They have been described as excitations or perturbances in quantum fields. This is what this looks like. So here's a simulation. This represents the pulsating quantum fields that pervade everything. Throughout this room, throughout this galaxy, throughout the universe, these quantum fields are fluctuating. And at the microscopic level, at the quantum level, this has been called quantum foam. Those red bits that appear, that's the high energy points within that field that can create quantum particles momentarily. They come into existence and they disappear. The gaps, they're not gaps, they're still pervaded with energy. They're just low energy points within that field. Do you know Sean Carroll? He's a leading quantum scientist. He says this is fundamental to the material world. This is what's fundamental. Before I talk about Einstein, I thought I'd had it there, but didn't say it. On my flight here, looking out of a window at the Atlantic Ocean, you could see the rippling from 40,000 feet, the rippling of a sea, an agitated sea. And occasionally, at the roughest points within that ocean, there are little white streaks caused by the breaking of the waves and the foam. The quantum world is the sea. The white streaks on the top of those breaking waves, the physical world around them. And from a cosmic time perspective, this world will dissipate, will sink back into that quantum sea.
just like these momentary particles that appear and disappear. Even Albert Einstein struggled with the discoveries of quantum science, famously saying, in regard to the randomness of the quantum world, God does not play dice with the universe. He came out of that era when they felt that the universe conformed to rigid laws. He called quantum entanglement spooky action at a distance. And the amazing thing about quantum entanglement is that distance has no effect. Its effect is instant. Whether two quantum particles that are entangled are a room apart or a whole galaxy apart. He said reality is merely an illusion, but a very persistent one. So quantum physicists have now shown us that the atoms that make up the matter of the material world emerge from localized quantized excitations or ripples in non-local fundamental fields. That's postulate 4. There is a continuum which links all living things together. It's also Samuel Taylor Coleridge who dreamt it, maybe, in one of his dream visions. And he said in his poem, The Alohan Harps,
"And what if all of animated nature be but organic harps diversely framed, that tremble into thought, as aware them sweeps, plastic and vast, one intellectual breeze, at once the soul of each and God of all."
And this is what Baker recognized. These great poets could see things. They were touched by the muses. And within their works, we can find profound truths. The theoretical physicist, David Bohm, he's considered one of the most significant physicists of the 20th century. Bohm proposed that consciousness and matter are projections for an underlying implicit order. He considered that implicit order to be a fundamental level of reality from which the explicit order, everything around us and ourselves, has emerged, has unfolded. These are really accepted scientists, yet they are having thoughts that are profound and deep and resonate with the ancient wisdom and the esoteric sciences. Another physicist, mathematical physicist, Nobel Prize winner, Sir Roger Penrose. We'll probably hear more about him over this weekend because he's been doing work with Stuart Heimoff on the quantum nature of consciousness. He suggested that at the most fundamental quantum level, the entire universe is pure, abstract information. He's not talking about electromagnetic waves or signals, digital signals. He's talking about an abstract realm of ideas that Plato talked about, an intangible substrata of absolute coherence and mathematical geometry from which the physical world is derived and formed. This introduces us again to what we heard earlier from Jeff, the holographic universe. The blueprint for the universe sits at a fundamental level of reality, and we are all unfolded from it. This is another echo of the postulate 2. All things live within the body of a greater being. And postulate 3. All things are made in the image of God. I want to talk about being from Norwich. This is my own piece. This hasn't come from Baker's writings, but I've been to this church. This is the church where St. Julian of Norwich in the 14th century was walled in to a cell. She was an anchoress, anchored the divine love of God on the earth. And she's actually famous for being the first known female published author. There's no other female before her that was ever. They may well have written, of course, but under a different pseudonym, but in which their gender wasn't recognised. She's most well known for a series of visions described in her book, Revelations of Divine Love. In one such vision, she says, "And in this vision, God showed me a little thing, the quantity of a hazelnut, lying in the palm of my hand, and it was as round as any ball. I looked therein and thought, what may this be? And God answered thus, it is all that is made." Doesn't that remind us of William Blake, Auguries of Innocence? To see a world in a grain of sand, and heaven in a wild flower. Hold infinity in the palm of your hand, and eternity in an hour. Yeah. The ancient wisdom tells us that conscious and life are not separate, but are aspects of a single, underlying spiritual reality from which all existence emanates. This underlying spiritual realm is Bohm's implicit order and the basis for postulate 1, that all things organic and inorganic are filled with life from the tiniest atom to the greatest galaxy. And the second truth, from the Idol of the White Lotus, the principle which gives life dwells in us and without us, is undying and eternally beneficent, is not heard or seen or smelt, but is perceived by the man who desires perception. And there's a brilliant example of the life principle. It's one of it makes me shiver every time I read it. It's by the author, J.B. Priestley, and it's an account of a dream vision he had after spending a day ringing birds, I think in the Hebrides in Scotland. It's from his book. It's written in his book, Man and Time. Yeah. So I'm going to read it to you because it is so powerful. I was standing at the top of a very high tower, alone, looking down upon the myriads of birds flying in one direction. Every kind of bird was there, all the birds in the world. It was a noble sight, this vast aerial river of birds. But now, in some mysterious fashion, the gear was changed and time speeded up, so that I saw generations of birds, watched them break their shells, flutter into life, mate, weaken, falter and die. Wings grew only to crumble, bodies were sleek, and then, in a flash, bled and shriveled, and death struck everywhere at every second. What was the use of all this blind struggle towards life, this eager trying on of wings, this hurried mating, this flight and surge, all this gigantic, meaningless biological effort? As I stared down, seeming to see every creature's ignoble little history almost at a glance, I felt sick at heart. It would be better if not one of them, if not one of us at all, had been born, if the struggle ceased forever. I stood on my tower, still alone, desperately unhappy. But now, the gear was changed again, and time went faster still. And it was rushing by at such a rate that the birds could not show any movement, but were like an enormous plane sown with feathers. But along this plane, flickering through the bodies themselves, there now passed a sort of white flame, trembling, dancing, then hurrying on. As soon as I saw it, I knew that this white flame was life itself, the very quintessence of being. And then it came to me in a rocket burst of ecstasy that nothing mattered. Nothing could ever matter, because nothing else was real but this quivering and hurrying lambency of being. Birds, people or creatures not yet shaped and coloured, all were of no account, except so as this flame of life travelled through them. It left nothing to mourn over behind it. What I had thought as a tragedy was merely emptiness of a shadow show. For now, all real feelings was caught and purified and danced on ecstatically with the white flame of life. I had never felt before such happiness as I knew at the end of my dream of the tower and the birds. Really powerful. So let's go back a bit and have a look at what the esoteric sciences tell us about the implicit order. In the beginning was the one existence, an absolute reality described as a living or moving fire, the divine flame or the egoic flame. As it says in the Bible, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And it's represented by the Om, the sacred word. And as we've seen, the septenary nature of the universe, each another 7 planes emerge from the divine flame. And each of those planes is subdivided into 7 subplanes. And let's have a little quick look at those subplanes. Are we moving? Yeah. There we go. I've given this a lot of thought. We know that the densest planes of the physical are the gases, the liquids, the solids. So right at the bottom, we've got the solids, then the gases. But I've been thinking, what about the other way round? And listening to Sean Carroll and what we know about the quantum world, quantum fields are the fundamental basis for the material world. So just perhaps, and this is an area for esoteric study, it's still evolving, as it is within science itself. But let's just suppose the first subplane of the physical plane of the quantum fields. Through, as we heard, the ripples, the excitations within quantum fields, the quantum particles emerge, the 17 particles of the standard model of quantum physics. They come together, and very occasionally they create simple atoms. And this is where I struggled. I'd be interested to know what Scott and others think, because at the beginning of the universe, after the inflation of the post-Big Bang, as it's called, but the big inflation, the universe was full of hydrogen and helium, undifferentiated, and over time it came together. And in the first magnitude, first generation stars, huge, great stars that burnt really quickly, and they started in their intensely hot cores create all the other elements of the periodic table. And over 3 generations of stars, I think it was, we have the elements that we know today. And that process of being forged in the heart of stars made me think, well, there's a different subplane involved here. So maybe through that process, all the other elements of the periodic table emerged. So there's your first 4 subplanes of the physical. And then, of course, as I said, we have the gas, liquid, and solids. One of the principles that the esoteric tells us that each of the subplanes resonates or has an affinity with the subplane of the next plane. So if we look at this model, there's a similar pattern as we go up through the planes. So maybe each plane starts with an astral quantum field, an astral field from which the material of the astral world emerges. So here's matter, all that we've talked about, 5%. And remember, 4% of that are the simple atoms, hydrogen and helium. So 1% is everything tiny compared to the immensity of what's there. 27% dark matter. We're starting to think maybe that represents the astral, the emotional world, the next plane above the physical, the one we experience when we have lucid dreams or astral projections. There's real substance there. And then dark energy, the rest of it, 68%. Remember, dark means science hasn't got a clue what that is, but we can tell them. In fact, I think David Bohm, Penrose and others, I've no doubt they've read The Secret Doctrine. They were aware of those things, but they were working in conventional fields, and if they mentioned anything like that, they'd have been kicked out and not listened to. So thank God they did use it carefully, wisely. So let's have a quick look at our unfolding nature. So we start with the monad. Blavatsky in The Secret Doctrine used a simple little passage, and it read, "Lift thy head, O Lanu. Dost thou see one or countless lights above thee, burning in the dark midnight sky?" And Lanu responded, "I sense one flame, O Gurudeva. I see countless undetached sparks shining in it." That represents the monad, the spiritual part of all of us. But I recently came across another representation of the monad I'd like to share. Some of you might know it. It's Indra's net from Buddhist philosophy. I think it provides another beautiful way of thinking about the monad. Indra's net stretches out infinitely in all directions, in each, like the quantum field that we saw. In each eye of the net, there is a single glittering jewel, like stars of the first magnitude, a wonderful sight to behold. If we now select any one of these jewels for inspection and look closely at it, we discover that in its polished surface there are reflected all the other jewels in the net, infinite in number. Not only that, but each of the jewels reflected in the one jewel is also reflected in all other jewels, so that there is an infinite reflecting process occurring. I think that's beautiful, and that represents how a spark can also be part of the whole. So the monad, driven by the will to be of God, if you like, or that higher, the egoic plane. So it channels the energies of the seven rays down through the planes to create the higher triad. And that's made up of the realms of Atma, divine persistent will, Buddhi, love and compassion, and higher mental, the realm of abstract thought. And they're all contained within a causal body, an envelope that will remain with us throughout all the lives on the wheel of rebirth. And we'll get to that in a little while longer. While this is happening, evolution is occurring. The universe is evolving. All the elements had to be made in stars first, then planets formed, and then on some rare planets that happen to be lucky to be in the Goldilocks zone from their local star, life started. I'm really excited, by the way, about looking into the universe and into the seas of the moons around Jupiter, because I think almost certainly there will be life found in those places, because it's a feature of the universe. Whenever conditions are right, stable enough for long enough, life will emerge. So over that time, gradually, over millions of years, our physical bodies formed. They're made up of physical, astral, and lower mental substance. Between the two, there's a tiny thread with not much energy passing between to begin with. So you can see two streams, the evolutionary stream of our physical bodies and the spiritual stream come together through an overshadowing process. And we become a spiritual being. And over repeated lives on earth, the antakarana grows, and it grows upwards. We have to draw nutrients from our environment, spiritual nutrients that build the antakarana and make that connection. And part of the purpose of life is the persistence and the ability to extract ourselves from the physical world as represented by we need to build our antakarana to make contact with the higher self that will sit patiently waiting. This dynamic, this relationship between the personality and the soul is the basis of transpersonal schools of psychology. And these are accepted principles within psychology. So this is the egg diagram of consciousness, and I'll have another picture of it soon, by Roberto Assagioli, who Baker worked with. And it has really profound importance, as we'll see. So Assagioli and psychosynthesis movement is based on the principle that human psychology is multidimensional, personality and soul, you can't separate the two, that there is a distinction between the I and the higher self, that will is a central guiding force, and that wholeness is achieved through psychosynthesis, which is reorientating the personality to the soul within. That's a better description of the egg diagram. And I've got you can see there's an interplay between each realm and the next realm. And in some respects, we need to align those. We need to control the lower unconscious and align the interplay between the realms of the higher mind. And that's how we make contact with the soul. But I wanted to give you an example of the subconscious and conscious interplay, because I think that's where we get what we call the sixth sense. I liken the subconscious mind to the RAM memory on a computer. So using, working on a computer, Microsoft Windows, if you're like me, over a session at the computer, you might have many, many windows open, but you're only conscious of the one in front of you, the one you're working on. Those other windows are there all the time, and you can just, a couple of clicks and you bring them to the fore. The sensory input from our sensory equipment that we perceive, albeit a fraction of what we potentially could perceive, is there all the time. But we are often only focused on one aspect of our sensory input. And I've got a really good example that highlights this from my own life. I was in Italy in the mid-90s filming this, the Pyramid of Cestius. That pyramid was built in the 1st century. And it's surrounded, like many things in Rome, by urban sprawl. We were on a traffic island filming it. And I was with a friend, he was the producer. I had the expensive digital camera and was filming this. And my friend had an SLR. He was taking photographs to do an accompanying album to go with the film we were making. And he just put it down. And while I was filming this, I suddenly got a tingle, really strong tingle, the sort of tingle I used to get listening to Baker's talks. But it wasn't right at the top of my head. It was lower down at the back. And I thought, well, that's funny. What around here could have caused that? The pyramid's great, but it wouldn't have caused that tingle. So I was wondering about this, and about a minute later, we were suddenly accosted by about 3 or 4 Italian youths, acting aggressively, shouting at us. One even put his arm around me and pulled me away so I wasn't looking at my friend anymore. And I suddenly thought, wow, gosh, what are we going to do? Then suddenly they disappeared. My friend looks at me, where's the camera? I looked down, and fortunately I was still holding tightly on to the video camera I had, which I had felt being pulled, but the SLR camera he had gone. My sight, whatever it was, I wasn't looking anywhere other than at the camera, maybe through the lens, but my subconscious had noticed you looking at us threateningly. I'd been completely oblivious of that looming threat, but I was given that message by Hayward, Rose. I think that's a really good example of how the unconscious, the subconscious is there all the time. So is the collective unconscious. So is the superconscious. We just have to open ourselves to it. I made a mental note at the time that if ever I had that feeling right there at the back of my neck, it's a bloody run. Yeah. Fortunately, it hasn't happened again, but I'll be ready to go or fight if it happens again. So as we see, there's a similar interplay with all the other realms of the psyche. And the psychosynthesis is about taking the conscious eye and moving it through disciplines, through exercise, to closer to the higher self. Transpersonal psychology, which is all about understanding the self, the higher self, was inspired by the work of probably one of the greatest psychologists of modern times, Carl Jung. He introduced the world to the collective unconscious and archetypes, which are universal inherited ideas or patterns of thought present in the collective unconscious. Jung said human beings are inwardly whole but have lost touch with important parts of ourselves, but that through listening to the messages from within, we can regain wholeness. What Jung called individuation, coming to know and giving expression to the higher self. And he said something really important. Each human being has a specific nature and calling which is uniquely his or her own, and unless these are fulfilled, the person can become sick. The purpose of life is to express the purpose of life, and we each bring that with us into this world. Viktor Frankl, another great psychologist, who had a fantastic history, he was a prisoner in concentration camps in the Second World War. And he noticed how you could not determine who would survive that trauma and who wouldn't. You know, big burly guys would crack under the oppressive regime within those concentration camps, while others, diminutive individuals like Frankl himself, who wasn't a big man, survived. And actually, it inspired his whole solar therapy approach, the importance of meaning. And he said, it's not meeting our basic needs that keeps us going through travail and adversity, it's the search for meaning. And I believe, from my experience in life, meaning comes from the soul, the higher self. Meaning that means something is only from the higher self. So I want to show you this representation. So in my time within the NHS, so about 2008, I did a leadership course with the NHS, and this was very much a principle, a representation of the human psyche that they use. They didn't use higher self, of course, or soul. It was core self. But I'm going to stick with higher self because that's what it really is, or soul. So it puts it at the center of our psyche. And it shows what surrounds it within the personality's makeup. First are our values and beliefs. And being closest to the higher self, that's where the higher self can first be felt. So if you've got someone in you that doesn't believe in the spiritual realm, start to explore through conversation with them what their true values and beliefs are. They're impacted, of course, by our sort of subjective and objective states. The significant others, our parents, our circumstances will impact on our higher self, on our values and beliefs, but you will find there the influence of the higher self. Next comes the principles we hold, our political affiliations, our ideas about right and wrong, and so on, are all in those principles. And then we have our strategies. So what are we going to do in the world? What career path are we going to follow? And so on. And finally, our behaviors, micro behaviors, that's our face to the world, what the world sees. In a young soul, The influence from the external circumstances of the life dominates. But even in an evolved soul, the external noise and pressures of modern life can drown out the voice of the soul, the higher self. That's why it's called the voice of the silence. We have to sit and listen.
There's one more well-known pioneer of transpersonal psychology I want to mention at this point: Abraham Maslow and his hierarchy of needs. From basic physical needs to self-actualization at the top of the pyramid. Self-actualization is to become aware of and realize one's full potential. In other words, to recognize and be directed by the higher self. But in our modern, materially focused, fast-paced and distracted world, many fail to hear or respond to the higher self within, and can therefore never achieve self-actualization, resulting in a truncated pyramid. The leadership coach and author Emmanuel Gobelot said in his book The Connected Leader that the affluent societies most of us live in have created a self-actualization vacuum that people are looking to fill. Remember Jung's words: each human being has a specific nature and calling which is uniquely his or her own, and unless these are fulfilled, the person can become sick. The author, Oliver James, gave us the word affluenza in his book of this name, which he defined as a painful, contagious, socially transmitted condition of overload, debt, anxiety and waste, resulting from the dogged pursuit of more. In the truncated pyramid, esteem needs are the highest that can be achieved through the pursuit of material wealth and social status. This represents those that Baker called the spiritually sick. So, what do we need to do to complete the pyramid? There is a triumvirate of disciplines that appear in many forms in many religious traditions, in the ancient wisdom and the esoteric sciences. If adopted sincerely in life, they guarantee spiritual progress. The first is meditation. Baker said meditation begins in the space between thoughts. Concentrating the mind, bringing our consciousness to a point, a singularity that is a springboard to access the higher mental realm of the higher self.
Aristotle said the soul never thinks without an image. So he gave us a great message there that we have to use symbols and images to communicate with the soul. And meditation enables us to create that space for the soul to give us images or for us to pose an image to the soul. Baker also said, because it is tough to meditate, it really is, especially if we've got a lot going on in life, but he said, if you find it hard to meditate, at least learn to sit in silence, because the soul disseminates in silence. Another option, if you find it hard to meditate, is record your dreams. Use your dream life as your interface with your soul. So very important in any spiritual pursuit to have a dream diary and write out our dreams, because as we write them, we're exercising the muscle that retains those memories, and our dream life can become an incredible source of inspiration for us. The next discipline is study. Study spiritual text. Study the material that resonates with you. And that's fine if it's religious text. Most of the world religions have a secret aspect, a mystical knowledge within them that resonates with the ancient wisdom. That's fine. It's what's right for you. And there is a principle of when we study deeply, and as Alice Bailey used to frequently say, ponder on this. As we do that, we start to create a vibrational quality within our own minds, thought forms that resonate with the author, and more importantly, with the inspiration of that author that led to those writings in the first place. There's a real secret key within the way that we study spiritual text. And then finally, because if we do those first two things, we'll start to be flooded with energy and meaning. But if we don't do anything with that, we'll blow up, literally, or our minds will fragment. So we have to give that out. Service to humanity in whatever way we can find to do. Baker used to use the expression of a windsock in the breeze. The only way to get energy, he would say, is to use it in the service of others. Love who you are with, and what you are doing. Provide service underpinned by platonic love. And importantly, because this helps nullify difficult karma, practice harmlessness in thought, word, and deed. These three practices promote the alignment of the soul's purpose with our values and beliefs, our principles and strategies, and our behaviours, and it creates a channel through us into the world. Baker always taught us that the soul will always respond when we express Plato's ideas of truth, beauty, and goodness. He would say the growth of a person into a spiritually infused entity demands that he express truth, beauty, and goodness in the world. So for all of us, an aspect of our soul's purpose is just that.
Robert Browning, a huge influence in Baker's own spiritual journey, wrote about the truth within in his epic poem, Paracelsus. Truth is within ourselves. It takes no rise from outward things, whate'er you may believe. There is an innermost centre in us all, where truth abides in fullness, and around, wall upon wall, the gross flesh hems it in, this perfect clear perception, which is truth. A baffling and perverting carnal mesh binds it, and makes all error, and to know rather consists in opening out a way whence the imprisoned splendour may escape, than in effecting an entry for a light supposed to be without. Tapping into the truth within ourselves releases energy into the conscious self and can trigger peak experiences. Many of us have had peak experiences at some point in our lives. They can happen spontaneously, especially in meditation, or be triggered by, for example, the experience of awe from nature, a star-filled night sky, an inspirational landscape, the beauty of an animal, a tree or a single flower, or from listening to great music, viewing masterpieces in a gallery, hearing about or reading acts of courage and self-sacrifice, and so on. Peak experiences can range from a sudden sense of well-being to, rarely for a few, superconscious and transcendental experiences in which we see beyond the illusionary world and can step outside of space and time. An example of such an experience is described by the author and physicist Fritjof Capra in his book The Tao of Physics, published in 1975. He said, "I was sitting by the ocean one late summer afternoon, watching the waves rolling in and feeling the rhythm of my breathing, when I suddenly became aware of my whole environment as being engaged in a gigantic cosmic dance. As I sat on that beach, I saw the cascades of energy coming down from outer space, in which particles were created and destroyed in rhythmic pulse. I saw the atoms and elements and those of my body participating in this cosmic dance of energy. I felt its rhythm, and I heard its sound. And at that moment I knew this was the dance of Shiva, the lord of dancers, worshipped by the Hindus." I expect everyone here is familiar with the allegory of Plato's cave, about a chained prisoner in a cave breaking free and discovering the world as it really is. Baker would also share a similar, less-known allegory called the blood cell in the eye. Oswald, a diligent red blood cell, faithfully carried oxygen from the lungs to the body's furthest corners. His daily journey was so familiar that he often made it without thinking, content to follow the well-trodden path down to the big toe, his designated oxygen drop-off point. One day, however, a sudden current at a bifurcation of an artery swept him off course. Instead of his usual route, Oswald was swept upwards towards the head, and before long found himself in narrowing vessels he'd never seen before, and then finally into a vessel so small he could only just fit. He suddenly found himself in the retina at the back of the eye. He was momentarily blinded by a blaze of light brighter than anything he'd seen before. As his vision cleared, Oswald saw that the great being in which he lived, moved and had his being was seeing a vibrant world beyond anything he'd imagined. Colours and shapes danced before him, revealing an immense world beyond the body's crimson interior. In that moment, he glimpsed the direction that great being was heading. Given the soul thinks in images and symbols, poetry, as a descriptor of images, is in many respects the most exalted use of the written language. Many poets have been inspired by nature and have attempted to capture the trigger events in their poetry.
One of the greatest examples, and I must give this to you because I love it so much, one of the greatest examples of a nature-inspired poem is The Windhover by Gerald Manley Hopkins. He was a Jesuit priest, and his poetry was way ahead of its time. There he is. Baker reproduced The Windhover in many of his books and used it as an example of the fourth ray of inspiration from nature. It's in two parts. The first part is the beauty of the sight. The second part of the poem is the fire, the response within him. And he actually considered it his best poem, Gerald Manley Hopkins, and that it was a tribute to Christ or to divine epiphany. I caught this morning's minion, kingdom of daylight Dauphin, dapple dawn drawn falcon in his riding of the rolling level, underneath him steady air, and striding high there, how he rung upon the rein of a wimpling wing in his ecstasy. Then off forth on swing, as a skate's heel sweeps smooth on a bow bend, the hurl and gliding, but abaft the big wind, my heart in hiding, stirred for a bird, the achieve of the beauty of the thing. Brute, beauty, valour, act, O air, pride, plume here, buckle! And the fire that breaks from thee then, a billion times told lovelier, more dangerous, O my chevalier! No wonder of it, sheer plod makes plough down Sicilian shine, and blue bleak embers, my dear, forgall themselves in gashed gold vermilion. A tribute to divine epiphany by a great poet who experienced fire from seeing a simple kestrel, a windhover, flying. The study of ancient wisdom and the esoteric sciences and the disciplines that we partake while doing that opens us to a universe within and beyond the material world. It's very like a flower, a lily that draws nutrients from the expression of its purpose in the world, unfurling its petals to reveal a jewel and a lotus, a reflection of the monad in the causal body. How could such an epic thing happen in one life, as Christianity would have us believe? It needs many lives. It's only through repeated lives on the earth that the soul unfurls. Reincarnation is fundamental. I was really interested to see a Pew Research study conducted at the beginning of this year, and it asked people about their belief in reincarnation, and an incredible 38% of those 18 to 34 accepted reincarnation in some form or other. I think that's incredible. It only dropped a little bit to those 35 to 49, 34%. And those aged 23, over 50, 23%. I've no doubt that the work of Douglas Baker, Alice Bailey, Blavatsky, and many, many others, bringing the ancient wisdom into the Western world in the language of the day are largely responsible for this increase or this rise in acceptance of reincarnation. Now, I'm going to quickly run through these. These are all people that you will know very well. Haven't got time to go through them individually, but there's some key things they said. Let's pick out one or two. Socrates, I am confident in the belief that there truly is such a thing as living again, and that the living spring from the dead, and that the souls of the dead are in existence, and that the good souls have a better portion than the evil. Walt Whitman, as to you, life, I reckon you are the leavings of many deaths. No doubt I have lived myself 1,000 times before. Henry Ford, this is wonderful. Genius is experience. Some seem to think that it is a gift or talent, but it is the fruit of long experience in many lives. That's Henry Ford, the industrialist who gave us the Ford car, and Carl Jung. I could well imagine that I might have lived in former centuries and there encountered questions I was not yet able to answer, but I had to be born again because I had not fulfilled the task that was given me. That's fantastic. Baker loved to quote this one by John Lennon. I'm not afraid of death because I don't believe in it. It's just getting out of one car and into another. These words, there's a beautiful, I think we've heard it already, but I just want to repeat it from Rumi, that reflects the first truth from the Idol of the White Lotus. The soul of man is immortal, and its future is a thing of a thing whose growth and splendor has no limits. And it's simply, I died as a mineral and became a plant. I died as a plant and became animal. I died as animal and I was human. Why should I fear? When was I less by dying? Yet once more I shall die to soar with angels blessed. But even from angelhood I must pass on. I think, I probably need to close. I was going to quickly look at reincarnation and the evidence for it, and echoing what we started with from Wordsworth. Our birth is but a sleep and a forgetting. But he also said, not in entire forgetfulness and not in utter nakedness, but that as we grow, shades of the prison house begin to close upon the growing boy. If you want to find evidence for reincarnation, talk to the youngest children. And there's one example where a friend of my family, I just quickly need to mention this one. A friend of my family were taking their 7-year-old son, the mother was taking their son James to the Norwich Castle Museum. Let me just show you the Castle Museum, built in the 11th century and used for much of its years from, I think, the 13th to the 19th century as a jail. And they were walking past, they'd gone to see the natural history area, but they walked past with James, a cell representation like that, and that's the wax figure, it's not a person, dressed in rags. And James looked up at Hannah and said, I wore clothes like that. I used to be very poor once. Hannah thought nothing of it, nothing more of it. Well, he tried to find out more from James, but he wouldn't say anything else. Later on that day, he kept his mouth shut, and that was all he got. James is now 22. He's studying science, but he's incredibly frugal. He had a good upbringing, went to a private school, but he hates spending money. He's worked from the moment he left school, and most of what he earns, he puts into investments, into savings, because he's desperate to have financial security. He's learned, self-taught about savings options. He's maximising what the government give him with lifetime ISAs. If he puts in a certain amount, the government will give him as much, 25% of that. So he wants to maximise what he gets out of that. He's got exactly the sort of mindset and temperament and frugality of someone who had a previous life that was in poverty because of lack of financial resource. And I think that's evidence of reincarnation. And just quickly to conclude, I want to introduce, come back. Edwin Arnold, he introduced the Victorian England to karma through The Light of Asia, where he said, "Who toiled a slave may come anew a prince for gentle worthiness and merit won. Who ruled as a king may wander earth in rags for things done and undone." So I won't do that one now. No. Yeah. So karma is the force that turns the wheel of rebirth.
So, reincarnation and karma are intrinsically interwoven. Karma provides the driving force that turns the wheel of rebirth. We most often think about karma as negative and causing difficulty, but as Edwin Arnold said in The Light of Asia, "Who toiled a slave may come anew a prince, for gentle worthiness and merit won." Good karma, from good deeds and selfless loving service, reduces the number of reincarnations, accelerating our progress on the wheel of rebirth. A young soul is likely to incur much more difficult karma than an old soul, and it may take many lives to work through this karma as the young soul matures. Let's consider we have 777 lives in total. The actual number may be much more than this, so please only consider this as symbolic representation. 700 of these lives are spent gaining experience from human life in every conceivable way, incurring and resolving the karma that dictates the circumstances of subsequent lives, our race, nation, gender, sexual orientation, abilities and disabilities, rich or poor, whether born in times of conflict and war or peace and stability, and so on. During these many, many lives on earth, the soul's purpose is to gain experience of everything that physical life has to offer, while also reducing the karmic load that has built up during the first few hundred lives. Then, eventually, the glamour of the material world starts to weaken, and we notice, very faintly at first, the voice of the silence, the maturing soul within. As Christopher Fry put it in the epilogue to his verse drama Asleep Prisoners, "Dark and cold we may be, but this is no winter now. The frozen misery of centuries breaks, cracks, begins to move. The thunder is the thunder of the flows, the thaw, the flood, the upstart spring. Thank God our time is now, when wrong comes up to face us everywhere, never to leave us till we take the longest stride of soul we ever took. Affairs are now soul size. The enterprise is exploration into God. Where are you making for? It takes so many lives to wake, but will you wake for pity's sake?" We at last awaken to our true spiritual nature and commence the path of discipleship, the path of return. This symbolically takes another 70 lives of increasingly conscious reorientation to the soul within. But spiritual progress on the path is not linear. It can present many difficulties as we work through the karma that remains, while avoiding incurring new bad karma by practicing harmlessness in thought, word and deed. As we tread the path of return, all that is good and all that is evil must come to the service and be worked through. Or as Fry put it, wrong comes up to face us everywhere. But as progress on the path is achieved, the balance of good karma begins to outweigh the bad. If we think of the spiritual path as footpaths on an ordnance survey map, good karma helps us to tread the most direct path of the soul. It provides us with a compass set to our true spiritual north, while bad karma leads us astray like a compass point that has lost its magnetic tip, and we become distracted by the glamour of the material world around us. The direct path is certainly not the easiest route. It needs single-minded determination. Like the words from John Bunyan's The Pilgrim's Progress, published in the 17th century. Come, pluck up heart, let's neither faint nor fear. Better, though difficult, the right way to go, than wrong, though easy, where the end is woe. Good karma manifests in life not only as good life circumstances and serendipitous events, but also brings an inner peace and a love of the divine. This is succinctly captured in Julian of Norwich's most famous quote, in which she said, "All shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well." Earlier, I quoted the passage from Paracelsus by Robert Browning about the truth within. Another passage beautifully captures the quality of good karma. For men begin to pass their nature's bound, and find new hopes and cares which fast supplant their proper joys and griefs. They grow too great for narrow creeds of right and wrong, which fade before the unmeasured thirst for good, while peace rises within them ever more and more. Such men are even now upon the earth, serene amid the half-formed creatures round. The last 7 lives of the symbolic 777 lives the soul lives represents those of the initiate. This is when the disciple reaches the mountaintop of initiation, takes the kingdom of heaven by storm, and is liberated from the wheel of rebirth. This is the 4th initiation, which represents mastery over personal desires and the resolution of personal karma. At this initiation, also known as the Great Renunciation, the causal body of the soul that has been with us throughout all our incarnations is sacrificed, and thereafter the liberated initiate communes directly with the monad. I will now conclude my talk with a poem by the one person I have met in my life, who I know for sure to be an initiate, Douglas Baker. I've glimpsed my share of heaven and hell from the unkempt highways of my own mind. My fish-like feet have felt the snares and tugs of 1,000 lives along that tortured way. Now shot of Piscean shoe and shod with soul, they feel the pulse of earth's crammed with heaven, and every common bush afire with God. The anima mundi, heavenly dew, staring from every eye, glowing from every hue. Her staff, Sanet's sacred rod, firstborn's plaything, plied with neural prod my back with ceaseless urge, and grew the fagal thongs of sensory scourge. Sweet pain of the entwined snakes, life's prop, that drove and flogged me to the mountain top. Thank you for listening.